What if the Red Wedding was discovered before it began? Not stopped after the first arrow, not survived by luck or chaos. Discovered before a single cup was poured, before the gates closed, before the music changed. What if someone in that castle knew what was coming and had the chance to stop it? The Red Wedding is the wound that never healed for this fandom. Not just because Robb Stark died, because of how he died. Betrayed at a feast. Under guest right. In a place he was supposed to be safe. It was the moment the show told its audience that honor does not protect you. That doing the right things by the rules of a world does not mean the world will honor those rules in return. But what if the warning came in time? What if Robb Stark walked into the twins knowing exactly what Walder Frey had planned, with a knife up his sleeve and the North at his back? What if the betrayers became the betrayed? This is that story. The Twins, the Riverlands. 299 Ak. 3 days before the feast. The man's name is Olivar. He is 22 years old, and he has been Robb Stark's squire for 2 years, and in those 2 years he has come to feel about Robb Stark the way people feel about things they did not expect to love. Completely. Without reservation. The way you feel about a person who is exactly what they appear to be, which in King's Landing or the Twins is so rare it feels like a miracle. He is a Frey. This is the fact that has been living in his chest like a hot coal for 3 weeks. He is Walder Frey's grandson, 3rd generation, one of dozens, unremarkable in the way that all of Walder's grandchildren are unremarkable to Walder himself. He has served Robb Stark for 2 years, and Robb Stark has treated him with the particular warmth of a man who does not distinguish between the highborn and the lowborn in his personal regard, who sees the person in front of him and responds to that person. No one has ever treated Olivar Frey this way. He heard the conversation he was not supposed to hear 3 weeks ago. He was bringing wine to his grandfather's solar. The door was not fully closed. He was going to knock. He did not knock because the voices inside were urgent and low in the way of people who are making plans, and something in the quality of the urgency made his hand stop before it reached the wood. He listened. He heard everything. He has been carrying it since. The weight of it. The specific anguish of knowing something that will destroy the person you most admire and not knowing what to do with the knowledge. He has turned it over every day for 3 weeks, every night, every hour of travel on the road to the Twins. He has been trying to decide. Tonight he makes his decision. The Twins. Robb's tent. That night, the camp is quiet. 3,000 men outside the Twins camped on the east bank. Robb's army, reduced from what it was, still considerable. Still the largest force in the Riverlands. They are here for the wedding. Edmure Tully to one of Walder Frey's daughters, the alliance rebuilt after Robb's betrayal of his own promise. Robb is in his tent with his commanders. He looks tired. He has looked tired for a year. The kind of tired that sleep does not address because it is not physical. It is the tiredness of a man carrying losses that keep compounding. His father, his brothers, his army, diminished. His marriage, which cost him the Frey alliance, and which he would make again without hesitation, because Talisa is the one real thing in a war that has destroyed everything else that was real. He is going over the maps with Roose Bolton when Olyvar enters. Olyvar says, "Your Grace, I need to speak with you. Alone." Robb looks at him. He sees something in his squire's face that makes him sit up straight. Olyvar is young and earnest, and has a face that does not easily conceal what is happening in it. What is happening in it right now is not something Robb has seen before. He dismisses the commanders. Roose Bolton leaves last. He pauses at the tent entrance. Something in the pause, something in the way his eyes move to Olyvar and then away again, something that Jon Snow, had he been in this tent, would have caught immediately. Robb does not catch it. Robb has never been suspicious of Roose Bolton. The tent empties. Robb says, "Speak." Olyvar speaks. He tells it the way he has rehearsed it in his head for 3 weeks. Clearly, from the beginning. The door that was not fully closed, the voices, the specific content of what he heard. Walder Frey's plan, the feast, the music, the signal, the men hidden in the walls, the Lannister gold already promised. He tells all of it. When he finishes, the tent is very quiet. Robb is very still. He is sitting at the map table, and he is looking at Olyvar with the expression of a man who has just had the floor removed from under his feet and is deciding in the moment before he falls what to do about it. He says, "You are certain." Olyvar says, "I heard it in my grandfather's voice. Your Grace." He was not speaking of plans. He was speaking of arrangements. Things already decided. Robb is quiet. He looks at the maps in front of him. The twins, the crossing, the position of his army, the position of Walder Frey's men inside the castle. He thinks. Robb Stark is not a strategic genius. This is something he knows about himself. He is a battlefield commander of the First Order, instinctive and fearless and capable of the kind of leadership that makes men follow him into situations they know are terrible. But the political game, the patient maneuvering, the thinking 3 moves ahead, that has never been his strongest quality. But he is not without intelligence. And he is looking at a map. He says, "Who else knows you're here?" Olyvar says, "No one." He says, "Who else knows what you told me?" Olyvar says, "No one. Only grandfather and whoever he made his arrangements with." Robb nods. He thinks for another long moment. Then he says, "I need you to go back to your tent. Act as you have been acting. Say nothing to anyone. Can you do that?" Olyvar says, "Yes." Robb looks at him. He says, "Why did you tell me?" Olyvar says, "Because you treated me like a person." He says it simply, without elaboration. It is the most honest sentence he has ever said. Robb looks at his squire for a long moment. He says, "Thank you." Olyvar nods. He leaves. Robb sits alone in his tent with the maps and the truth. He sits for a long time. The twins. Robb's tent. An hour later. He calls Catelyn first. She arrives quickly, reading the urgency in the summons. She has always been able to read him. Her face, when she enters the tent, is already prepared for something difficult. She has been prepared for something difficult for a long time. Grief does that. It calibrates you for the worst, he tells her. He watches her face. Catelyn Tully Stark has the face of a woman who has endured things that should not be endurable, and has continued to endure them anyway because there is no alternative, and also because endurance is itself a form of defiance. She receives the information about the Red Wedding with the stillness of someone who is not entirely surprised. She says, I had a feeling about this place. He says, you said nothing. She says, I said it to the gods. I had no evidence. I had only the feeling that Walder Frey's welcome was wrong in some way I could not name. She looks at her son. She says, we have 3 days. He says, yes. She says, what do we do? Robb leans over the map. He points. We go in, he says, as planned. Everything as planned. The wedding proceeds. Edmure marries his Frey girl. We eat the feast. Catelyn's eyes sharpen. But we go in knowing, Robb says. And we go in ready. She says, and Roose Bolton? Robb looks up. He says, what about Roose Bolton? Catelyn is quiet for a moment. She says, the boy told you about Walder Frey. Did he hear the names of the others involved? Robb thinks about this. He says, he said the Lannister gold was already promised. He did not say through whom. Catelyn says, Roose Bolton has been sending ravens to the south since Winterfell fell. I noticed the frequency of them but said nothing because I had no reason to name it suspicious. Now I name it suspicious. Robb goes still. He looks at the map. Roose Bolton commands his own forces within the Northern Army. 2,000 men. If those men are not Northern in their loyalty, but Lannister or Bolton, then the threat is not only inside the twins, it is inside the camp. Robb says quietly, we need to be careful about who we tell. Catelyn says yes. He says, who do we trust absolutely? She says, Great John Umber, his son Small John, the Mormont men, your personal guard, the ones who have been with you since before the war. Robb nods. He says, tell no one else. Not yet. Not until I understand the full shape of it. He stands. He says, Mother, the feast goes forward. Edmure's wedding goes forward. But this time we are not walking into a trap. Catelyn looks at her son. She sees Ned in him. The jaw, the gray of the eyes, the particular quality of his stillness when he has decided something. She has been seeing Ned in him for 2 years and grieving it and being glad of it simultaneously. She says, your father would be proud of you. Robb says, he'd tell me I should have seen it coming myself. She almost smiles. She says, he'd say both. The twins. The next day, Robb meets with his trusted men one at a time. Never together, never in the same place. He calls them to his tent on separate pretexts. Small John Umber to discuss the supply lines from the north. Sir Reynold Westerling to review the order of march. Lord Rickard Karstark is gone, executed for murder, but the men who serve directly under Robb's banner are still his. He tells them enough, not everything, because everything requires Olyvar's name and Olyvar's safety matters. But enough. He tells them there is reason to believe the Freys intend treachery at the feast. He tells them he intends to attend the feast anyway, and he tells them what he needs from each of them. The responses are what you would expect from men who have been fighting beside Robb Stark for 2 years. Small John Umber says, with the particular economy of a man who prefers action to analysis, tell me where you want me. The planning is precise, not elaborate. Robb has learned in 2 years of war that elaborate plans are the first casualties of reality. The plan is simple, because simple plans survive contact with the unexpected. The northern men will be armed inside the hall, not obviously. Daggers under cloaks, swords beneath tables. The kind of armament that does not announce itself, but is available when required. Robb knows the feast will not begin the violence. Walder will want the food consumed, the cups emptied, the host obligations satisfied in appearance before he violates them in practice. There will be time. The second piece is the men in the walls. Olyvar told him about men hidden in the walls of the great hall. Crossbowmen, positioned before the feast, before the guests arrive, already in place when the doors close. Robb needs someone inside the twins before the feast who can find those men. He thinks about who this can be. He thinks about a man who has moved invisibly through situations his entire life because he is small and misshapen, and everyone underestimates what small and misshapen people can accomplish. He thinks about a man whose interests are currently aligned with Robb's, and who has the specific skills this particular task requires. But that man is not here. He thinks about Olyvar. Olyvar is a Frey. He knows the twins. He knows the passages. Robb calls him back. The twins. Robb's tent. That afternoon. He explains what he needs. Olyvar listens. When Robb finishes, Olyvar says, "You want me to go into the twins tonight and find the men in the walls." Robb says if they can be found and dealt with quietly, the threat in the hall is greatly reduced. Olyvar is quiet. He is 22 years old, and he has already made the hard choice. The choice in the tent last night was the hard one. This is the continuation of it. Once you choose a side, there is no neutral ground to retreat to. He says, "I know the passages. I grew up here." Robb says, "I know." Olyvar says, "If I'm found." Robb says, "You won't go alone." He brings in Sir Wendell Manderley, who is large and quiet and very good at the kind of violence that doesn't make noise. He brings in 2 others, men Robb has chosen for the specific combination of loyalty and capability. He says, "Olyvar knows the way. You keep him safe." Wendell Manderley nods. He has the expression of a man who has been waiting for something useful to do. Robb looks at Olyvar. He says, "You don't have to do this." Olyvar says, "I know." He says, "Then why?" Olyvar says, "Because it's right." He says it simply, the same simplicity as the night before. Because it's right. As though that is the whole of the decision, and the rest is just logistics. Robb thinks of his father. He nods. "Go tonight," he says. 2 hours after the last light. Olyvar nods. He leaves. Robb turns back to the map. He has one more thing to address. Roose Bolton, the twins, the camp. That evening. Roose Bolton is not a man who shows anything he does not intend to show. He has the face of a man who decided at some point in his youth that expression was a vulnerability, and has maintained the decision with perfect discipline ever since. His eyes are pale. They receive everything and return nothing. He is, in the language of the court, difficult to read. Robb has never found him difficult to read because he has never tried to read him. He has accepted Roose at face value the way you accept things about the people you depend on, because the alternative is paralysis. He is trying to read him now. He calls Roose to his tent on the pretense of reviewing the march order for the day after the feast. They sit over the map. They discuss logistics. Robb watches. He watches the way Roose's eyes move, the specific quality of his attention. Whether there is anything in it that corresponds to what Robb now knows. There is. It is subtle, very subtle. It is the specific quality of a man who is performing naturalness in a situation where naturalness would be genuine. the slight over-precision of his speech, the careful management of his expression that goes one layer too deep for a man with nothing to manage. Robb sits with this. He does not show what he sees. He discusses logistics. He nods at Roos's responses. He ends the meeting with the ease of a man who has no concerns. Roos leaves. Robb waits until the footsteps are gone. Then he calls Greatjon Umber. He says, "I need Bolton watched. Every hour, every movement. And I need it done by men who are not in his line of command." Greatjon says, with the voice of a man who has been waiting to be useful, done. He leaves. Robb sits alone. He is looking at the map of the twins, at the rivers, at the crossing, at the specific geometry of the trap that was built for him here, and that he now intends to step into carefully and spring from the inside. He is not his father. He has always known this. He fights differently. He thinks differently. He makes different mistakes. But he is not going to make this one. The twins. 2 nights before the feast. Olyvar comes back before dawn. He comes back with Wendell Manderly and the 2 others, and they are all alive, and they are not entirely clean. Olyvar's hands are shaking slightly. Not from fear, from the aftermath of action. The body's processing of what it has just been asked to do. He reports to Robb. He found the men in the walls. 12 of them, positioned in the hidden galleries above the great hall, crossbows loaded, waiting. They had been there for 2 days. They were Frey men, loyal to Walder, not soldiers in any formal sense, but capable enough. They are not capable now. Robb receives this information with the stillness of a man who ordered it and must live with having ordered it. He says, "Anyone see you?" Olyvar says no. He says, "Are you certain?" Olyvar says certain. Robb nods. He says, "This was a hard thing I asked of you." Olyvar says, "It would have been harder to do nothing." Robb looks at his squire. This young man who was born into the family that planned to kill him and chose differently. Who made the choice that cost him everything he grew up belonging to and made it anyway because it was right. He says, "When this is over, whatever happens, you have a place in the north. You understand me? A place, a name, a home, whatever you need." Olyvar looks at him. He says, "Thank you, Your Grace." He goes to sleep. Robb sits awake until the sun comes up. The twins, the day of the wedding. The day is grey. The Riverlands in autumn is grey the way the north is grey, which is a different quality of grey. The north's grey is ancient, stone-coloured, a grey that has been there since before men. The Riverlands grey is the grey of weather and water, and the particular flat light that comes off the rivers in the cold months. The army crosses the bridge. Robb rides at the head of it. He is wearing the same face he always wears in public, the face of the king in the north, serious and direct and capable. The face that his men follow because it does not waver. Inside that face, he is watching everything. He watches the Frey soldiers at the gate, watches their eyes, where they go, what they signal to each other. He watches the arrangement of men on the battlements. He watches the specific way Walder Frey receives them in the great hall, hunched and venomous and smiling with the particular warmth of a host who has decided his guests are already dead. He greets Walder. He accepts the bread and salt. Guest right. In another version of this day, The bread and salt are offered and accepted and violated before the night is out. The oldest law of hospitality in Westeros, the sacred obligation that no true host can break without cursing his house, broken deliberately and with planning. Robb accepts the bread and salt, and his face does not change. He thinks, "You are going to break this tonight. You have already decided to break it. The bread and salt mean nothing to you, and you will violate them anyway." He thinks, "I know." He smiles at Walder Frey. He says, "My lord, I thank you for your hospitality." Walder says, in the paper-thin warmth of a man performing generosity, "My king, you honor my house. They both know what they mean." Neither shows it. The twins, the great hall, before the feast. The wedding ceremony is in the sept. Edmure Tully, who does not know what Robb knows, marries his Frey bride with the expression of a man who expected something worse and received something acceptable. The girl is young and pretty and not unkind in her face. Edmure looks at her with something like surprise and something like hope. Robb watches the ceremony and thinks about Talisa. She is not here. He sent her away 2 days ago. He told her he needed her to go to River Run. He told her it was for the organization of the northern supplies coming south. He made the logistics sound plausible because the logistics were plausible. He told her he loved her. He held her for a long time in the tent before she mounted her horse. She looked at him when she left with the expression of someone who knows they are not being told everything. He did not tell her. He could not tell her without the risk that the fear on her face would be visible in the camp. Could not tell her that he was sending her away because he did not know with certainty that the plan would work, and if it did not work, he needed her out of reach of what would follow. He watches Edmure's wedding and he thinks about his wife and his child she is carrying, and he thinks, this ends tonight, one way or another. He does not know which way, but he has done everything he can. The twins, the great hall, the feast begins. Food and wine and the performance of celebration. The Freys eat and drink and watch their guests with the precise attention of people who are waiting for something. The Northerners eat and drink and watch with the precise attention of people who know they are being watched and are watching in return. In any other version of this night, this tension would be invisible. The Northerners would not be watching because they would not know to watch. They would be eating and drinking and allowing themselves the ordinary vulnerabilities of celebration. Tonight, they are armored in knowledge. Catelyn sits near the high table. She is watching Walder Frey's sons and grandsons with the particular attention of a woman who has been reading the faces of men in halls for 20 years. She sees the signals, the small nods, the way eyes move to the doors and back again. She sees the moment when Walder would have given the signal. The music is playing. In another version of this night, Rains of Castamere begins at this moment, and the doors close, and the crossbow bolts come from galleries that are empty tonight. The music plays. The doors do not close. Walder Frey's hand moves toward the signal. It does not complete the movement. Because Robb Stark stands. He stands at his place at the high table, and he looks at Walder Frey and he says, in the voice that carries across a battlefield, "Lord Frey." Walder looks at him. The hall begins to go quiet, the way halls go quiet when something changes in the quality of the air, when the body of the room feels the shift before the mind does. Robb says, "I know what tonight was meant to be." And then everything happens at once. The doors are opened by Umber men who have been positioned at them since before the feast, not closed, opened wider, letting in the cold air and the northern soldiers who have been waiting in the yard with torches. The Frey soldiers in the hall reach for weapons. The northern soldiers are faster, not because they are better fighters, though many are. Because they knew, because preparation beats reaction every time, and they have had 3 days of preparation against men who were expecting to act against the surprised. The hall erupts. It is not clean. It is not organized. It is the violent chaos of a plan meeting reality and reality pushing back. Men die on both sides. The tables overturn. The food and the wine and the candles and the torches make the specific chaos of a hall where fighting has started. Robb is in the center of it. He fights. He has always been a fighter. The Grey Wind is somewhere in the fighting, the direwolf moving through it with the lethal efficiency of something designed for exactly this. There are screams, steel on steel, the specific terrible sounds of men being hurt. Walder Frey tries to run. He does not run fast enough. He is old and hunched, and the hall is full of his enemies now, and he is stopped at the door of the gallery by Great John Umber, who is extremely large and not gentle about stopping things. The twins. The Great Hall. After. The hall settles. This takes time. Violence has its own momentum, and it does not stop simply because the central conflict has resolved. But eventually, in the specific way that aftermath is different from battle, the noise decreases. The fighting stops. The men standing look at the men not standing. The northern side has losses. Not catastrophic losses. They knew, and knowing meant preparation, and preparation meant fewer deaths than there should have been in a hall against men who expected surprise to do their work for them. But men are dead. Northern men. Men who came to a wedding and died for it anyway. Robb stands in the center of the hall. He is breathing hard. He has blood on him that is not all his. His sword is in his hand, and he looks at the men around him, his men. And he looks at the Freys, who are alive and captured. And he looks at Walder held by Umber. He walks to Walder. He stands in front of the old man. Walder Frey is small and shriveled in Greatjon's grip. He does not look like a mastermind. He looks like a very old man who has been caught. He is afraid and he is angry, and underneath both of those things he is something else. He is calculating, even now. Even here. Robb looks at him. He says, "You took our bread and our salt." Walder says nothing. Robb says, "You swore guest right and you planned murder." Still nothing. Robb says, "Why?" Walder looks at him with the pale eyes of a very old man who has made many decisions in a long life and considers this one simply a decision that did not work out. He says, "Lannisters pay better than Starks." It is the most honest thing he has said in years. Robb looks at him for a long moment. He thinks about what justice requires here. He thinks about what honor requires. He thinks about his father, who would have said that justice and honor are the same thing. and who died, because the world does not always agree. He thinks about the men who are dead on his side of this hall. He says, "Take him to the cells." The cells, not the dungeons, not the execution block, the cells. Catelyn appears beside him. She says, "Robb." He says, "Not tonight. He needs to answer for this in front of the lords. Publicly. Formally. Not in a hall full of blood and broken tables." She looks at him. She says, "Your father would have done exactly that." He says, "I know." He sheathes his sword. He looks around the hall. He says to the room, "Tend to the wounded. Gather the dead. Send word to Lord Tully and to the northern lords. The feast is over." He walks out of the hall. The twins. Robb's chambers. That night. He sits alone. The battle energy has left him, and what it leaves behind is the particular exhausted clarity that comes after things that cannot be undone. He is alive. His men, most of them, are alive. Edmure is alive. Confused and frightened, but alive. His mother is alive. He thinks about Talisa. He wants to send a raven immediately. He wants to tell her it is over. He wants to hear her voice in the way that you want things you cannot have at the specific moment you want them, completely and with no substitute adequate. He sends the raven. It will take time. But it goes. He sits in the chair by the window and he looks out at the river. The twins reflected in the dark water, the torches of his soldiers on the bridge. Catelyn comes in. She sits across from him. She says, "Bolton tried to leave in the fighting." Robb looks at her. She says, "He was stopped. He is in custody." Robb closes his eyes. He says, "How much of this was him?" She says, "We found letters in his tent. Correspondence with Tywin Lannister. The arrangement was made months ago. Walder Frey provided the location and the opportunity. Bolton was to ensure the Northern Army was neutralized from within." Robb is very still. Roose Bolton, who rode beside him, who commanded his forces, who ate at his table and gave him counsel and all the while was writing letters south. He says he would have killed the men. She says yes. In the fighting, in the confusion, it would have looked like battlefield casualties. She says it flatly. Not because she has no feeling about it, because she has too much. Robb opens his eyes. He looks at his hands. He says, "We came so close." She says, "We did." He says, "If Olyvar hadn't." She says, "But he did." A silence. She says, "Robb, you need to think about what comes next. This changes things considerably. Bolton's treachery, Freys, the Lannister involvement. This is not just a defeated plot. This is evidence." He says, "Evidence of what?" She says that Tywin Lannister paid for the murder of the king in the north at a wedding feast, under guest right. She pauses. The lords of Westeros will hear that, and they will understand what it means. Even the ones who have been sitting on fences will understand what it means. Robb looks at her. He thinks about this. He says, "Or they will decide I am weakened, that a king who was nearly killed at a wedding feast is a king in trouble." She says, "Then we show them a king who knew, who prepared, who walked into the trap and shut it from the inside." She pauses. That is not a story of weakness. That is the opposite. Robb is quiet. He says, "We need the Blackfish." She says, "He's 3 days' ride. I'll send tonight." He nods. He says, "And I need to speak to Edmure. He deserves to know what his wedding was used for." She says, "Tomorrow. Tonight you sleep." He says, "I don't think I can." She says, "Try." She stands. She touches his face in the way she has touched his face since he was very small. The particular touch of a mother's hand, the one that means you are here and I know you are here, and that is what matters. She says, Ned would be proud. He says, you said that before. She says, it's still true. She leaves. He sits by the window. He does not sleep for a long time. But eventually he does. The twins, Robb's chambers, the morning after. Dawn comes grey over the river. Robb has not slept. He has been at the window since before the dark began to thin, watching the torches of his soldiers on the bridge, listening to the sounds of the castle settling around the aftermath of the night. The wounded being tended, the dead being gathered, the captured Freys and Boltons men sorted and secured. He is thinking about his father. He thinks about his father more than he allows anyone to see. Ned Stark's death is the event that made Robb a king, and the event he is least equipped to have survived. Because the man who should have taught him how to survive it is the one who is gone. He has been making decisions for 2 years, with the ghost of Ned Stark at his shoulder, asking the question Ned always asked. Is it right? Not, is it smart? Not, is it strategic? Not, will it work? Is it right? He has tried to ask that question. He has not always been able to answer it. He married Talisa because it was right, and it cost him the Frey alliance. He executed Karstark because it was right, and it cost him 1/3 of his army. He kept his word and his honor in every way he could keep them, and the cost of each keeping compounded until he found himself at the Twins with fewer men and fewer allies than he started with. His father kept his honor, and it cost him his head. Robb has thought about this, about whether honor is a liability in the world as it actually exists rather than the world as it should exist. He has not resolved it. He suspects it cannot be resolved, that it is one of the genuine, irresolvable tensions of being a person. The gap between how things should work and how they do. But he thinks about last night. He thinks about what it cost to prepare. 3 days of not showing what he knew, of performing normality while underneath it he planned. That is not honesty, that is a form of deception. He deceived Walder Frey and Roose Bolton and everyone in the Frey household who did not know he knew. He also saved his men. He sits with the tension of this. He does not resolve it, but he sits with it honestly, which is different from pretending it does not exist. Catelyn enters. She has also not slept. She has the particular composure of someone operating on will rather than rest, the composure of a woman who learned early that the world does not pause for grief and has been applying this lesson ever since. She says the count is in. 11 dead on our side, 37 wounded, 6 badly. Robb says the Freys. She says more. They were not prepared for us to be prepared. He nods. She says Bolton is talking. Robb looks at her. She says, he has been talking since before dawn. He wants terms. He says he can give us information about the Lannisters' full plan, the scope of it. What else was arranged beyond the twins? Robb says, what does he want in return? She says, his life. Robb says, his life is not mine to offer. He conspired to murder the king in the north. That is a matter for the lords of the north to adjudicate, not for me to bargain away in private. She says, that is exactly what your father would have said. He says, I know. He pauses, but I will hear what he knows before we decide anything. The information does not require granting terms. We take what he knows and make the decision about his life separately. She says, he will see that as a betrayal. He says he already betrayed everyone he owed loyalty to. He has limited standing to complain about the concept. She almost smiles. She says, come and eat. You cannot govern on no sleep and no food. He follows her. The twins. The cells. That morning, Roose Bolton sits in his cell with the particular unruffled quality of a man who has decided that whatever happens next, panic will not improve it. He looks at Robb when Robb enters. He says, Your Grace. Robb says, tell me what you know. Bolton says, my life first. Robb says, tell me what you know. Bolton says, I have terms. Robb says, you have a cell and a choice. You can tell me what you know and I will consider your situation with that information as a factor. Or you can tell me nothing and I make my decision without it. Either way, I make the decision. Bolton looks at him with his pale, assessing eyes. He says, Tywin's plan extended beyond the twins. Robb waits. Bolton says, the night of the feast, while your men died here, Lannister forces were to take Riverrun, a siege, arranged through secondary agreements with parties I can name. The idea was to catch the North between the collapse of its military leadership and the loss of its primary Riverlands fortress simultaneously. Robb is very still. He says, how large a force? Bolton says 8,000. Mobile, positioned in the Westerlands and waiting for the signal. Robb says, the signal being my death. Bolton says yes. Robb stands. He says the signal is not coming. He walks out. In the corridor he stops and thinks for exactly 1 moment about 8,000 men waiting in the Westerlands for a raven that will not arrive. Waiting right now, camped somewhere between Casterly Rock and the Red Fork. Listening. He needs to move faster than that raven. He walks quickly. The twins. The war room. Midday. He calls the commanders. He tells them about the 8,000 men. He watches the Blackfish, who has just arrived, and who absorbs the news with the compressed intensity of a man who has been fighting too long to be surprised by much, but is registering this clearly. He watches Edmure, who is still pale from the night, and who goes paler with the specific pallor of a man understanding that his home was the secondary target. Robb says, we have time. Not much. The signal was meant to come last night. They will wait before concluding the plan has failed. They will not want to move without confirmation. Blackfish says, how long? Robb says, 2 days, maybe 3. Blackfish looks at the map. He says, I can be in Riverrun in 2 days if I ride now. Robb says, do exactly that. Take the fastest riders, reinforce the garrison, and send word to every Tully bannerman in the Riverlands. I want them to know what was planned. I want them angry. Blackfish stands. He is already moving. He pauses at the door. He says, your father would have liked how you handled this. He leaves before Robb can respond. Robb looks at the map. He picks up a quill. He begins to write. The twins. The following days. The ravens go in every direction, to Riverrun, to Winterfell, to the Northern Lords, to the Vale, to Dragonstone, to the places where Robb Stark still has allies and the places where he thinks he might make them. The content of the ravens is specific. He has thought carefully about what to say and what to withhold, and how the information should land before he can control the response to it. He says this, The Lord of the Crossing and the Lord of the Dreadfort conspired with Tywin Lannister to murder the king in the north and all his bannermen at a wedding feast under guest right. The conspiracy was discovered. The conspirators are in custody. Evidence of Lannister involvement has been secured. He says this in the language of a man making a formal accusation, not a man making a complaint. There is a difference. The formal accusation requires response. It requires lords to choose their position. The responses come, some quickly, some slowly, some with the particular hedging of lords who have been neutral and are trying to determine how to remain so, but some without hedging. The Mormonts, the Manderleys, the Umbers, whose lord is still at the Twins and sends a letter north with the specific brevity of a man who does not need many words. We stand. The Blackfish arrives in 4 days. He is Brynden Tully, Catelyn's uncle, a man who has been fighting for 30 years and wears it the way some people wear certainty. He looks at the situation at the Twins, and he looks at Robb and he says, "What do you need?" Robb says, "I need the Riverlands." Blackfish says, "You have them." He pauses. "Tell me the plan." Robb tells him, "It is not a simple plan, but it is clearer than it was a week ago, because a week ago he was walking into a trap, and now he is standing on the trap, and it is considerably easier to plan from solid ground. The Lannisters need to respond. They will respond. Tywin Lannister does not absorb a strategic failure without responding, and the failure of the Red Wedding is the most public strategic failure his house has suffered. The evidence of his direct involvement in the plotting of murder at a wedding feast, a violation of guest right, is not something that can be managed quietly. He will come with armies. Good. Robb wants him to come with armies. Because Robb knows where he is now. He knows who his enemies are. He knows who his allies are. He knows the terrain of the Riverlands and the northern lords at his back, and the Blackfish at his side, and Edmure, shaken and furious and with something to prove, holding River Run. He knows. Knowing, he has learned, is almost everything. The Twins. Walder Frey, 3 days later. Robb goes to see Walder Frey in his cells. He goes alone. Catelyn told him to bring men. He understood the logic and came alone anyway because there are conversations that require the particular pressure of solitude, and this is one of them. Walder is old in the way of men who have refused to die for so long that the refusal has become the defining characteristic. He is 90-something, small and shrunken, with the bright specific eyes of a man whose mind has not gone even if everything else has. He is in a cell that is better than he deserves and worse than he is accustomed to. He looks at Robb when Robb enters. He says nothing. Robb sits across from him. He says, "I want to understand something." Walder looks at him. Waiting. Robb says, "You gave us bread and salt. You sat at the high table with my uncle. You watched your daughter married into our family. And then you planned to murder everyone in the hall." Walder says plans change. Robb says guest right does not change. Walder makes a sound that might be a laugh. He says guest right is a story lords tell small folk. It serves when it serves. When gold is better than old law, men choose gold. Robb looks at him. He says, "You built your house on a river crossing. You have charged tolls to every lord and army that passed through the Riverlands for 500 years. Your power exists because travelers trust that you will not harm them while they cross. He pauses. Do you understand what you were about to do to yourself? Walder blinks. It is the first sign that something has landed. Robb says, if word had spread that the Lord of the Twins murdered his guests at a wedding feast, no one would ever cross your bridge again. Not willingly. They would find another way. Another crossing. Another arrangement, and your house, which has survived 500 years because it controls a crossing that men trust, would be finished. He stands. You would have burned everything your family built for Lannister gold. Walder says nothing. Robb says the gold was not worth it. Walder says very quietly the gold is never the point. The point is that the Starks have always treated the Freys as lesser house. Lesser blood. Bannermen to be insulted and dismissed and promised things and have the promises broken. Robb says, I broke my promise to you. Walder says, yes. Robb says, and that cost me. I have said so publicly. I came here to make it right. He pauses. Murder was not the right. Walder looks at him. He is old and trapped and defeated. He is also, Robb can see, still thinking, still the man who has survived 9 decades by thinking faster than the people around him. He says, what happens to me? Robb says, you answer to the laws you broke. The lords of the Riverlands and the North will convene. You will have the opportunity to speak. They will decide, Walder says, and the decision, Robb says, is not mine to pre-announce. Walder looks at him for a long time. He says, you're more like your father than I expected. Robb says, I'll take that. He walks out of the cell. In the corridor, he stops for a moment. He thinks about what Walder said, about the Freys always being treated as lesser. He thinks about whether this is true, and he thinks it probably is, at least partially, the specific dismissiveness of old houses toward newer ones, the way rank compounds on itself, and the people at the bottom of the pile absorb the weight of everyone above them. He thinks, this does not excuse what was planned. He also thinks this does not mean the treatment was right. Both things are true simultaneously. He files this away. It is the kind of thing that a lord, a king, a man who governs people needs to understand, not to excuse betrayal, to prevent it. He walks back toward the war room. He has work to do. The twins. Olyvar. That evening. Olyvar is in the yard when Robb finds him. He is sitting on a barrel near the stables. He has been sitting there for most of the day. He is 22 years old, and he has betrayed his grandfather and watched men die in a hall, and he is processing this in the specific way of young people who have done something they believed was right and are now living in the aftermath of it. Robb sits beside him. He says nothing for a while. Then he says, "How are you?" Olyvar says, "I don't know yet." Robb says, "That's honest." Olyvar says, "I keep thinking about the men who are dead on our side. The ones who died in the hall even though we knew. I keep thinking if I had told you earlier. A week earlier. A month." Robb says, "They might still be dead. War finds ways." Olyvar says, "But not this way. Not at a feast." Robb is quiet. He says, "You saved more men than you lost. You know that." Olyvar says, "I know." He pauses. "It doesn't feel as clean as knowing it sounds." Robb says, "No, it never does." He pauses. My father used to say that the right choice is rarely the comfortable one, that if it were comfortable, it probably wouldn't require choosing. Olyvar looks at him. He says Lord Stark sounds like he was worth following. Robb says he was. He is quiet for a moment. He made the right choices too, and they cost him everything. He pauses. But they were still the right choices. Olyvar says, "Is that supposed to be comforting?" Robb says no. It's supposed to be true. Comforting and true are different things, and when they can't both be, I'd rather have true. Olyvar sits with this. He says, "My grandfather is in the cells." Robb says, "Yes." He says, "I don't feel what I expected to feel about that." Robb says, "What did you expect?" He says, "Guilt or relief. Something cleaner than what I feel." He pauses. "What I feel is just tired." Robb says, "Tired is right. Tired means you understood the weight of what you did." He stands. "When this is over and things are settled, you come north. I meant what I said. A place, a name, a home, whatever you need." Olyvar looks at him. He says, "You're already thinking about what comes after." Robb says, "Always. That's what it means to lead people. You have to already be thinking about the next thing, while the current thing is still happening." He pauses. "It is exhausting." Olyvar almost smiles. Robb says, "Get some sleep. Tomorrow is another long day." He walks away. Olyvar sits on the barrel for a while longer. He looks up at the sky over the Twins, which is clearing now after the grey of the morning. Stars coming out, the specific stars of the Riverlands, which are the same stars as everywhere else and which feel like something different when you are sitting in the aftermath of a decision that changed everything. He breathes. He is tired. He sleeps. King's Landing, Tywin Sola, 1 week later. Tywin reads the Raven. He reads it in the way he reads everything, completely and without visible reaction. He reads it a second time. He sets it down. He stands. He walks to the window of his solar in the Tower of the Hand. He looks out over King's Landing. The city below him, 500,000 people entirely unaware that the thing he built on careful months of arrangement has just come apart. He thinks about how. The plan was sound. He has run through it in his mind 100 times, and it was sound. Walder Frey was reliable in the way that venal men are reliable, because their reliability is purchased rather than principled, and the purchase price was met. Roose Bolton was reliable in the way that ambitious men are reliable, because the offer exceeded any other available opportunity. The plan was sound. Something was not sound. He thinks about the squire. The grants. He thinks about who knew what and when and how the information moved. He has his own intelligence apparatus, but even intelligence has limits when the source is inside a family's own household. He thinks about Robb Stark. Not the way he thought about Robb Stark before. He has thought about Robb Stark as a military problem, a battlefield commander above average but limited by youth and inexperience in the deeper game. He has managed him as such. The loss of the Frey alliance as a point of leverage. The construction of the Red Wedding as the solution. He thinks about a boy who received a warning 3 days before a feast and used those 3 days to take apart an elaborate trap without the trap knowing he was doing it. He revises his assessment. He says to himself, in the empty room, underestimated. He walks back to his desk. He pulls out a blank sheet of parchment. He begins to write. The counter is going to require thought. Not the military response, he has armies for that, but the political counter. The guest right violation is the problem. Whatever Robb Stark does with that evidence, and he will do something with it, will have effects in courts across Westeros. Even houses that have no love for the Starks will find the violation uncomfortable. It touches something older than political alliance. It touches the foundations. He writes for a long time. He does not finish before the candle burns low. He sets down the quill. He looks at what he has written. He thinks, this will be harder than I planned. He is not accustomed to things being harder than he planned. He is, however, accustomed to adjusting. He picks up the quill. He continues writing. The twins, Catelyn, the night the ravens arrive. The responses begin coming in on the third day. Catelyn reads them first. She has always been the one who processes information before it reaches Robb. Not because he cannot process it, because she is faster at identifying the emotional texture of a message beneath its words, and in this situation the emotional texture is as important as the content. The Mormonts respond in 2 sentences. They stand. The Manderleys respond in a longer letter that is nonetheless unambiguous in its conclusion. They stand. The Umbers need no letter. Griachon is there. Some lords are hedging, the language of careful men, who want to be on the right side, and are not yet certain which side that is. She reads these with the particular patience of a woman who has been reading political correspondence since she was a girl at River Run, watching her father navigate alliances. She brings Robb the summary. He listens. She says, the guest right evidence is doing what you hoped. Even lords with no particular love for the North are made uncomfortable by the specific nature of what was planned. It touches something older than politics. He says good. She says, but Robb, we need to talk about what comes next, not tactically, politically. He looks at her. She says, you are the king in the North. You have been fighting this war for 2 years and it has cost us more than we had. The North is tired. The Riverlands are tired. Even men who believe in this cause are tired. He says, I know. She says, if we are going to continue, you need to articulate something more than survival. You need to give people something to fight toward, not just something to fight away from. He is quiet. She says, your father died for honor. You have been fighting for the North and for justice for his death. Both of those are real. But they are backward-looking. They are about what was taken. She pauses. What are you fighting to build? It is the question he has been avoiding. Not because he has no answer, because the answer requires him to say out loud what he wants, and what he wants feels too large to want in the middle of a war where wanting large things has a way of becoming the thing that gets taken from you next. He says, I want the North to be free, truly free. Not a vassal state that bends the knee whenever a king in the South decides the North's resources are needed. A nation that governs itself, that has its own laws and its own succession and answers to no throne in King's Landing. Catelyn listens. He says, I want Ned's name cleared. I want the realm to know that the man they executed for treason was the most honorable man who ever sat on a small council. I want that to be the thing that is known, not the traitor story they have been telling. He says, I want my son to grow up in a world where the word of a Stark means something, where the promises we make are not made to be broken, and where the men who break promises under guest right are not rewarded with gold. He stops. He looks at his mother. He says, Is that enough? She says, It is a beginning. He says, Then let's begin. Dragonstone, Stannis Baratheon. 2 weeks later. Stannis reads the raven from the twins. He reads it with the expression he gives everything, which is the expression of a man weighing it on the scales of principle he carries in his chest at all times and never sets down. Davos Seaworth is in the room. He is always in the room when the ravens come. He is the man Stannis trusts to tell him what he does not want to hear, which makes him invaluable, which Stannis acknowledges with the particular grace of a man who values things correctly even when he does not like them. Davos says, guessed right. Stannis says, yes. Davos says the Lannisters funded the murder of a king at a wedding feast, under the oldest law of hospitality in Westeros. Stannis says, yes. Davos says, and there is documentation. Stannis says, yes. Davos reads the copy of Bolton's letter that Robb included. He reads it carefully. He is not a man of letters by birth. He learned to read as an adult, and he reads with the specific attention of someone for whom the skill was not given but earned. He sets the letter down. He says, this changes things. Stannis says, it changes things. Davos says, for the realm. Or for us. Stannis is quiet for a moment. He says, I have been building my claim on justice, on the law of succession, and what is rightfully mine by birth. He pauses. This letter is also about justice, about the law being violated by the people who benefit from it when it suits them and discard it when it doesn't. Davos says Robb Stark is not your ally. Stannis says no. Davos says, but you have a common enemy. Stannis says nothing. He walks to the window of Dragonstone. He looks out over the sea, the particular cold light of the island, grey and unforgiving. He says, the enemy of my enemy is not always my friend, but he is sometimes useful. Davos says, a raven to the twins? Stannis is quiet for a long moment. He says, write it. I will tell you what to say. Davos picks up a quill. Stannis says, tell the king in the north that Stannis Baratheon has received his evidence. Tell him that the violation of guest right is an offense against the laws of gods and men both, and that the party responsible will answer for it. He pauses. Tell him nothing more. Not yet, but tell him that. Davos writes. He says this is the beginning of something. Stannis says perhaps. He looks at the sea. He says, the realm is full of men doing wrong things and calling them necessary. I am tired of necessity being the excuse for everything. Davos says, aye. He finishes writing, seals the raven, stands. My lord, whatever comes of this, you're doing the right thing. Stannis says, I know. I always know. That is not the difficult part. The difficult part is what the right thing costs. He looks at the sea. He is right about that. The Riverlands. The weeks that follow. The war does not end. This is not a story in which one averted plot ends the war. The war is a large thing with many causes and many participants, and it does not stop, because a wedding feast went differently than planned. But the shape of it changes. The North consolidates. The lords who were waiting on Robb's strength see strength demonstrated and stop waiting. The Blackfish holds the Riverlands with the grim efficiency of a man who has spent his whole life being underestimated and has learned to use it. Edmure, with something to fight for beyond political arrangement, fights with a specificity of purpose he did not have before. The guest right evidence moves through Westeros like water finding its level. Robb does not use it as a weapon. He uses it as a truth. He sends copies of the letters, Bolton's correspondence, and the records of Walder's arrangement to every great house in Westeros with a single accompanying sentence. This is what was planned for a king and his men under the law of guest right. He does not tell them what to think. He does not need to. The Tyrells have been navigating the politics of King's Landing with the careful ambiguity of a house that is too powerful to ignore and too smart to commit until they can see the winning side. They receive the evidence. Olenna Tyrell reads it in her chambers in the Red Keep with the expression of a woman who has seen a great many things in a long life and still finds this one remarkable. She says to her granddaughter, "The young wolf is smarter than I gave him credit for." Margaery says, "What does that mean for us?" Olenna says, "It means we watch more carefully." The Martells receive the letters in Sunspear. Oberyn Martell reads his copy 3 times, not because it is difficult to understand, because it gives him a feeling he has not had in a long time. Not about the North or the Riverlands or the war in the South, about older things, about his sister and a tower in Dorne, and the particular quality of crimes that are never answered for. He does not act immediately. He thinks. Thinking, for Oberyn Martell, is itself a kind of action. The Riverlands. The road west. 1 month later, the 8,000 Lannister men are still in the Westerlands when Robb moves against them. They have been waiting. The signal did not come, and they are soldiers who were given an order, and the order has not been cancelled, and they are sitting in their camps doing what soldiers do when they are waiting, which is complain about the food and the cold and the delay, and wonder what is happening and if they are ever going to be told. Their commander is a Lannister cousin named Daven, capable and loyal, who has been watching the ravens come and go with increasing unease for 3 weeks. The raven from King's Landing that should have arrived, telling him to march on River Run, has not arrived. The ravens he has sent asking for instruction have been answered vaguely. He is starting to understand that something has gone wrong without knowing what. He finds out when the northern cavalry appears on the western horizon. 2,000 riders, fast-moving. Exactly as fast as Robb said they needed to be to catch a force that was waiting rather than marching. The terrain in the western Riverlands is rolling, and the riders use it, appearing over one ridge and disappearing into a valley and appearing on a second ridge before the camp below has fully processed the first sighting. Robb is at the front. He has been riding for 2 days and his horse is tired and he is tired and he does not care about any of that because he is looking at the camp below him and he is thinking about what these 8,000 men were supposed to do and what they are going to do instead. He sends the herald. The herald rides down to Daven Lannister's camp under a white flag and delivers the message. The message is simple. It is the specifics of what was planned. Bolton's letter and Walder Frey's confession in summary. The evidence of what Tywin ordered. You were part of a plot to murder a king at a wedding feast under guest right. Your commander in King's Landing is named in documentation already distributed to every great house in Westeros. Surrender now and you will be treated as soldiers who were following orders. Fight and you will be treated as knowing participants in the murder of a king. Daven Lannister reads the message. He reads it twice. He is a soldier. He has spent his life in service to his house. He is not a man who thinks deeply about political philosophy, but he is a man who understands that there is a difference between being a soldier in a war and being an instrument of an assassination plot. and that the difference is not academic when it comes to how history names you. He sends the herald back. He says terms. Robb accepts the surrender. He does not gloat. He does not perform it. He rides into the camp, and he meets with Daemon Lannister in the commander's tent, and he is direct and businesslike about it. The soldiers are disarmed, and their horses are taken, and they are fed, and they will be held at Riverrun until the war resolves one way or another. Daemon looks at Robb across the table. He says, "You're not what I expected." Robb says, "What did you expect?" He says, "The rebel king. The boy who called himself a king because his father was executed and he had an army?" Robb says, "That's part of it." He says, "The other part?" Robb says, "The North is mine, its people are mine, that's what I'm fighting for." Davin says, "And Tywin?" Robb says, "Tywin paid for a murder that didn't happen. That has consequences." He rides back east. He is tired in a way that goes deeper than the 2 days of riding, the specific exhaustion of a man who has been carrying something enormous for a long time and cannot yet put it down. But he is also something else. He is the thing he has not been in a long time. He is winning. He does not say this, saying it feels like the specific kind of temptation that the gods punish. But he knows it. He can see the shape of it. The North is mobilized. Riverrun is reinforced. 8,000 Lannister men are disarmed and in custody. The guest right evidence is in every great house in Westeros. Stannis has sent a raven that is not an alliance, but is the beginning of something. He is not winning the war, but he is winning. One step, then another. The twins. Robb's chambers. 2 months later, Talisa arrives. She comes with a small escort and the expression of someone who received a raven and rode immediately. She comes into the chambers and she looks at Robb with the specific completeness of someone assessing whether the person in front of them is intact. He is. He looks tired and older than when she left, and there is something in his eyes that was not there before, a quality she does not have a name for yet, the quality of someone who has stood in a place where everything could have ended and did not end, and who carries that fact in his body. She holds him for a long time. He holds her. He says, "You knew something was wrong when you left." She says, "I knew you were sending me away for a reason. I didn't know what." He says, "I'm sorry." She says, "Don't be." She pulls back and looks at him. "Tell me." He tells her everything, the squire, the warning, the plan, the hall. He tells her about the men who died, and about Walder in the cells, and about Bolton and what he was carrying in his tent. He tells her about the ravens and the evidence and the blackfish and what the lords have said. She listens. She listens the way she always listens, completely, with the specific quality of attention that he has loved from the first time he saw it in a field hospital. She is a physician. She gives things her full attention because her full attention is what things deserve. When he finishes, she is quiet for a moment. She says, "What happens now?" He says, "The war continues. Tywin will respond. He will not accept this." She says, "I know. I mean, what happens to you, to us?" He says, "I don't know." She says, "That's honest." He says, "I'm trying." She says, "I know." She puts her hand on his chest. He puts his hand over hers. She says, "The child will be born in spring, whatever else is happening." He says, "I know." She says, "A spring child, in the middle of a war." He says, "My mother was a summer child. She survived." Talisa almost smiles. She says, "Your mother is formidable." Is that a promise that spring children are formidable? He says in this family, yes, they stand together in the chambers of the castle that was supposed to be his tomb. Outside, the river moves past the twins with the indifference of water. The same river it was yesterday, the same river it will be tomorrow. Robb Stark is alive. His wife is with him. His child is coming. The war is not over, but for the first time in a long time, it is possible to look at it and see the shape of winning inside it. Not guaranteed, not simple, but possible. And possible, after everything, is enough. The Riverlands, the convening, 2A&A half months later. The Lords convene at Riverrun. It is the largest assembly of Northern and Riverlands lords since the war began. They come from the mountains and the rivers and the cold reaches of the north, where winter is not a metaphor, but a fact of life. They come because Robb called them, and because the things that have happened at the Twins require formal acknowledgement and formal response. They come also because they heard about Davin Lannister's surrender and the disarmed 8,000, and the guest right evidence, and the raven from Stannis Baratheon that everyone has heard about, because secrets in Westeros are only secret until they are interesting enough to travel. And this one traveled fast. They sit in Riverrun's great hall. Robb stands before them. He has spent 2 days thinking about what to say. He has asked Catelyn. He has talked to the Blackfish, and to Edmure and to Greatjon, who told him to say what he meant, and say it plainly, because northern lords have no patience for flourishes. He speaks plainly. He tells them what was planned at the Twins. He tells them in the specific detail that the evidence supports. He tells them about Bolton's letters and Walder's arrangement and the 8,000 men waiting in the Westerlands. He tells them about Olyvar, who he names with permission, and about the 3 days of preparation and what those 3 days cost and what they saved. He tells them about the men who died anyway. He tells them their names. He has spent time on this part. Learning the names. The families. Where they were from. A man named Donnell from White Harbour with 2 daughters. A man named Sir Wendell, who was not Sir Wendell Manderley but a cousin of his from a minor branch. A man named Harwin, who had been in service to House Stark for 20 years. He says their names out loud in the hall. The hall is very quiet. He says these men came to a wedding feast. They came because I asked them to, and because they trusted that the guest right of the Twins would protect them. The guest right was violated. The men who planned that violation were paid by Tywin Lannister with Lannister gold. This is not accusation. It is documentation. He looks at the hall. He says, I am not asking you to be angry on my behalf. I am asking you to consider what kind of realm we are building. Whether it is the kind where the oldest laws exist only when the powerful choose to honor them. Whether it is the kind where a man can plan the murder of his guests at a wedding and be rewarded for it with gold. He pauses. And whether that is the kind of realm we want to give to our children. The hall is still quiet. Then Greatjon Umber stands. He does not say anything elaborate. He is not a man for elaborate things. He says, the North remembers. It is 3 words, but the hall takes them up. Not in the unison of men who rehearsed it. In the specific way of men who find in 3 words the exact expression of what they have all been separately feeling. The North remembers. Robb looks at his lords. He thinks about his father, about honor, about the world as it should be and the world as it is and the gap between them that a person spends their whole life navigating. He thinks this is worth fighting for. He says, then let us remember, and let us build something that is worth the remembering. The hall responds. Outside, the tumblestone runs, cold and steady, past the walls of River Run, and the spring is beginning in the slow, tentative way of springs after long winters, and somewhere to the north the wolves run in the forest that is older than the war and will be older than its conclusion. The north endures. The river lands. Spring. 3 months later, the child is born. A boy. He is small and has dark hair and the grey eyes of the north, and he comes into the world making the sounds that new things make when they discover they exist. Loud, persistent, certain. Robb holds him. He holds him in his hands, and he looks at this new person, and he thinks about all the things that had to happen for this moment to exist. A squire who could have said nothing and said something anyway. A warning received and believed. 3 days of preparation instead of a feast of betrayal. He thinks about his father. He thinks about all of it. He says, Eddard. Talisa looks at him. He says, if you agree. She says, I agree. He holds his son. He holds him for a long time. Outside, the spring arrives in the riverlands in the gradual, tentative way of springs after long winters. The trees begin. The rivers run full with snow melt from the mountains. The birds come back. Robb Stark, king in the north, stands in a window with his son and looks out at the world that still exists, because a young man named Olyvar chose to say what he knew. The war is not over. But the king in the north is alive. His son is alive. The north endures, and somewhere in the camp, a direwolf raises its head toward the spring sky and opens its mouth. The howl carries across the riverlands, across the rivers and the hills, and the small green beginning of a world coming back after cold. The north remembers. And the north is not finished. What if the red wedding was discovered before it began? The knives stayed sheathed. The music didn't change. And the young wolf walked out of the twins alive. Not because he was lucky. Because one person chose honesty over belonging. Because one squire looked at the man he served and decided that was worth more than the family he was born into. That is what saves kingdoms. Not dragons. Not armies. The moment when one person chooses the right thing. The north. Winterfell. Later that year, word travels north faster than armies. The small folk of the north receive it in pieces. A lord's raven here, a merchant's story there, a soldier coming home from the riverlands who stops at an inn and tells the table what he witnessed. Word of what was planned at the twins and what was done instead moves through the north village by village, hold by hold, until it reaches the cold places where the long winter is already tightening its grip. The people receive it the way the north receives things. Without much noise, with a quality of attention that is different from the south's attention. Older, more patient, more accustomed to the length of things. They receive the names of the dead. They receive the name of the squire who warned the king. They receive the words the king said at River Run. The north remembers. In a village 3 days north of Winterfell, a woman named Marna, whose son rides with the northern army, hears the story from a passing rider. She stands in the doorway of her house in the cold, and she listens to the whole of it. When the rider is done, she says nothing for a long moment. Then she says, "He is his father's son." The rider says, "Aye." She goes back inside. She has bread to finish, and a fire to tend, and a life that does not pause for the wars of kings, which is the life of most people in most places at most times. But she is glad. She is glad in the specific way of people who have been hoping for something for a long time and have mostly stopped expecting it. The way of people for whom the world has delivered disappointment so consistently that hope itself has become a thing they carry carefully, not openly, not loudly, because openly and loudly it tends to get taken away. She is glad, and further north still, beyond the last village, beyond the last hold, where the forest meets the land that belongs to no one yet, and the wind comes down from the mountains with the smell of the real cold in it. A grey direwolf stands on a ridge and looks south. Grey wind. The direwolf raises his head. He howls once, long, carrying. In the way of these animals, which is not entirely explicable and not entirely not, the howl says something that has no words in the common tongue. Something about the pack and its survival, about the thing that was threatened and is not ended. The North is listening. The North is always listening. The howl carries south on the wind, over the villages and the holds and the cold rivers running fast with snowmelt, over Winterfell's grey towers and the King's Road and the wall that stands at the edge of everything, patient and enormous and cold. The North remembers. And the young wolf is alive. The twins. Olyvar's last night, the night before Olyvar leaves for the North. He sits at the edge of the bridge. He has been given permission to go. Robb told him 2 days ago that the time was right, that the twins were no longer the place for him, that the North was ready to receive him when he was ready to arrive. He has spent 2 days preparing for a journey to a place he has never been, which is a strange kind of preparation, all anticipation and no memory to draw on. He sits at the edge of the bridge, and he looks at the river. The Trident runs cold and steady beneath him, indifferent in the way that rivers are indifferent, which is completely and without malice, simply oriented toward the sea, and uninterested in anything that is not also oriented toward the sea. He thinks about the door that was not fully closed. He thinks about standing in the corridor with the wine and the voices inside, and the moment his hand stopped before it knocked. He has thought about this moment many times since, trying to identify what it was that made him stop, whether it was the tone of the voices, the specific words he caught first, whether he can account for the moment in terms that make sense, or whether it simply was what it was, a threshold he reached and made a decision at. He thinks he cannot account for it fully. He thinks that may be true of all the decisions that matter. He thinks about his grandfather in the cells. He has not gone to see him. He does not think he will. He does not know what he would say or what Walder would say in return, and he does not know that anything said in that cell would serve either of them. His grandfather will face the Lords and answer for what was planned, and that is its own kind of accounting, and it does not require Olyvar's presence. He thinks about the king. He thinks about the first time Robb Stark spoke to him as a person and not as a squire. 3 months into the service, a morning after a battle where Olyvar had done something that was not particularly remarkable but was competent, and Robb had said simply, "Good work." 2 words, but said in the way of a man who means them specifically to the specific person he is saying them to. He thinks, "I did not know a thing could be worth that much until I had it." He sits for a long time. Then he stands. He goes back inside. He finishes packing. In the morning he rides north. The north is a long way from the twins, and it is cold, and it will be colder still in the months ahead. He is a river lord's grandson going to a world of stone and ice and ancient cold, and he does not know what it will ask of him, or whether he will be equal to what it asks. He knows only what Robb Stark said. A place, a name, a home, whatever you need. He rides north.